Hello, good evening, and welcome to another live ticker show. Hope you're all doing well. Let me introduce you to our wonderful, illustrious panel. Next to me, as normal, we have Palm. Good evening, Palm.
Good evening, Johnny. Good evening, everyone.
Below Palm, we have Andy. Hi, Andy.
Hey, mate. Good evening, everyone.
And nestled below me, we have Ryan from Time and Tested. Hi, Ryan. How's it going, man? Hello, Ryan.
Good evening, guys. Good evening.
That was a bit of delay there. Good, excellent.
Good evening, guys.
I hope everybody is well. Tonight we have a very, very special guest. We have Nicholas from Fierce Watches. Let's just bring Nicholas in. Hi, Nicholas. How are you doing, sir?
Hi there. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well, thank you. Doing well.
Good. Welcome to the show.
Yep. Hey, Nicholas.
Hey there.
Right. So John's going to go through the hellos and the.
I certainly am. We've got a hopefully a packed audience tonight. Okay, Timepiece Bob. He said hello. Hello, Timepiece Bob. Chili Badger, one of our admins. Hi, Chili. How are you doing? Team room be open just a jiffy. Hold on to your seats and upvote. Thank you. Yes, please upvote. Thank you very much. Moza Reville, good evening. Ray, hello, good evening. How are you doing? Hey. Whole Milk, TNT FXD. Yes. Hello, Lux. How are you doing? Matt H, good evening, guys. Not voted. How are you doing? Thank you very much. Okay, Travel and Watches 8. Good evening.
Hey.
Okay, a few people in there. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show.
So, okay. Hello, everyone. And without further ado, we are going to do what's on the wrist check. And our guest will obviously go first. So, Nicholas, what do you have on your wrist?
Thank you. Well, tonight I'm wearing a Fears, unsurprisingly. This is one of our new Brunswick 40mm in Fears blue on the bracelet. Wow. And yeah, I mean, I'm completely spoiled because not only do I get to design the watches I want to own, we then have a safe filled with them. And so if I wake up one day and go, oh, I want to wear a blue dial today or a pink dial or a red dial, I can literally just go into the safe and be like, right, okay, I'm gonna grab that. But yeah, no, the blue dial of the Brunswick 40, I've been wearing this a lot. I've been wearing the prototype for months and months. So yeah, it's become a firm favorite of mine.
Well, very nice, and it matches the V-neck jumper as well. So,
well, this is it. You know, I thought it's sort of nicely coordinated.
Hang on, I'll put you back on full screen again, so you can show everyone how well.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Look at that.
Yeah, perfect. Look at that.
It's awesome.
Silver picks up the silver in the bow ties. So
it does. Yeah. Right. So, Johnny, is it a surprise today?
It is a surprise. It's not the FXD, guys. It's very similar. Bought this last week after having Elliot Brown as a guest. Ian Elliot the other week.
Elliot.
Yeah, from Elliot Brown. I got one of these got it off eBay, which is the Holton Professional, the quartz one that is the issued model. So there you go on the rubber strap. Love it. Absolutely love it. Brilliant watch. Excellent.
Yeah,
that's very
nice. Really good.
The Holton.
Yes.
So Ryan, the new guy.
Yes. The new guy. I'm wearing my Fears Mach 2 Brunswick dial, the last white one that says Brunswick underneath the Fears part. So underneath where it says,
show us
take
if you
it
want.
off real quick.
Yeah.
And you see where it says Brunswick?
Yeah,
it's very little. Yeah, and I think that's the coolest part.
Yeah,
and I just
makes it incredibly rare as well. It's
it's
one of the rarest of the white dial watches. I mean, this is the thing. Being a small brand, we've had to make little adjustments over the years, and it suddenly results in watches like this, where I think it's like 20 something have ever been made.
Oh, wow, that's a good one.
Yeah. and this was the last one. And I actually was watching a video of Nicholas's on Instagram, and he said this was the last one. And I said, that's it. I'm pulling the trigger and getting this. And it fits my wrist great. I mean, it's beautiful, as you can tell. And the one thing that I really love about Fears is that this strap here is a short one. So because my wrists are small, you can. I'm able to. It's not hanging over like tons of strap. So that's what's on my wrist today.
Nice one.
Excellent.
Very nice.
Excellent.
Andy's got something
Ooh,
special,
so-
I think.
I'm going at Deco, and I'm wearing my jumping hour from the 1930s. So let me get that in focus.
What brand?
Ooh.
Surprise us what brand that is.
It's a mystery. So it's called Zeus, and I have no idea who Zeus is. It's the Swiss movement. So yeah, it's a bit of a mystery watch, but I believe there was a case designer of these jumping hours in the 1930s who were producing these for many different companies. So you see a lot of these around. So I'll just show it again. You do, with my mic, you do see a lot of these around, but with many different brand stamps on them. But I think there was one guy in the 30s who were, producing these and the movements, and then brands were buying that and putting their stamp on it. Yeah, but really cool watch. Really enjoying it. Yeah.
And what did you kick to the curb to buy that then, Andy? I know you.
I didn't. I bought it with money. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You didn't
Money?
Ready money.
Whatever. Will
I
you be
didn't
using
swap
next?
any watches. Yeah. Actually,
He
I
emptied his
confess I
piggy
didn't.
bank.
I use crypto actually, but yeah.
It's not money.
Well, digital money.
Software. But yeah.
Software money.
Okay. And for me, I have, as it's Speedy Tuesday, I have my Speedmaster triple date, the only one that tells you that it is Tuesday.
Oh,
And there
yeah.
you go. And this could be the last time I ever wear it. But watch this.
Oh,
So take a good look at it then.
Speed sale.
Betrayal, the betrayal.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So that concludes the wristwatch check.
Absolutely.
So what we're going to do is we're going to make Nicholas, full screen as our guest of honor. And John is going to ask his first question.
Okay. Yes, Nicholas, please can you tell us about your watch journey and how you got to be where you are today as the main man of Fierce Watches?
Certainly. And we've only got an hour, right? Like I'm going to have to give you the concise story.
The concise one, please. Yeah,
you can overrun a little. Don't worry.
We have a number of questions, so an hour on that one single question might be a bit long.
I tell you what, at 35, I sometimes feel like my life already is like a 3-part Victorian novel. It's there's been so many twists and turns. But no, in terms of watches, it sounds like a cliche to say like I've always loved watches, but that is true. I mean, when I was about 6-7 years old, my parents bought me a watch that pretty much any kid of the 90s in the UK will be aware of. And it was a tiny little Timex. And it came with a book teaching you how to tell the time. And I remember being so proud of this watch. And the thing that made me most proud was there were 2 versions of the watch. There was one which came on a red strap, which was a manual wind mechanical. And there was one which came on a pale blue strap, which was quartz, battery powered. And I remember at 6-7 years old in the playground being so like top dog because I had the blue strap, I had the quartz one, and I didn't have that weird old fashioned cheap technology mechanical, which was on the way out. And this is of an era when like, if a watch was quartz, it proudly said it on the dial, like clock said it, anything that was quartz was cool, right? And yeah, I mean, it was just such a lovely little watch. And I remember, as I did with all the first few watches I ever owned, I used my compass in maths lessons to engrave my name on the case back. So this watch ended up having this really bad misspelled Nick Scargill scraped into the back of it. But I loved it. I wore that every single day until I was about, I think 10 or 11 years old. And then I got a Casio, but not a digital Casio. It was an analog Casio with a tiny little digital screen. And I've still got that watch at home, actually. I'm very sentimental when it comes to watches. So when people talk about watches coming in and out collections, like only my most valuable pieces, monetary wise, have ever left the collection. And that was when I was setting up Fears. But that Casio was brilliant. Anyway, we fast forward to teenage years, and I always loved the Reverso. I was very into Hercule Poirot, Art Deco period. And I still remember looking in the FT and I saw an advert for the Reverso. And this must have been like 1998, 99. And I remember saying to my dad, like, oh, could you find out how much that costs when you go up to London? And he came back and he said, you won't believe it. It's £1,200. And I remember my mind just being blown that anything could cost over £1,000, let alone a wristwatch. Anyway, I subsequently persuaded my parents to buy me not the Reverso, sadly. They bought me a little Accurist rectangular watch, which was sort of like a homage to the Reverso. It didn't flip, it didn't do anything fancy, but it had that sort of Art Deco vibe. And then nothing really happened for the next few years. I wore those watches. And then I decided when I was about 16, I wanted to buy myself like a proper watch. And basically, I'd set my heart on buying a Tag Heuer. And then I started reading up about watches and decided actually maybe I'll push my budget out a bit and go for an Amiga. And it took 2 years of saving up money. And eventually I treated myself to my dream watch, which was an Amiga Seamaster GMT, the Great White, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. And I remember a few days before my 18th birthday, walking into an AD and slapping down my, my NatWest debit card and paying £1,300 for this watch. And the crazy thing is, at the time, the Rolex Explorer 2 white dial would have only been an extra £400. But I was just like, there was no way I could stretch that. 1,700 was way too much, Anyway, I wore that Amiga. I wore that Amiga almost every day until I got to Rolex. And in between that time, I was at university, did a degree in economics, was going to become an investment banker, largely because I wanted to buy nice watches with the bonuses bankers were being given. I graduated in 2008. So I graduated into the financial crisis. So sadly, Deutsche Bank said, nope, we're not taking you. Anyway, I worked a bit for a few years and then decided I actually wanted to focus on something that I loved. And that's when, after a lot of persuasion, Rolex eventually took me on as an apprentice. And so I started my proper horological journey in 2011 in my early 20s, training to become an apprentice. And it was brilliant. I mean, hands down, one of the best companies you can work for. Very, very different inside the door to how it's perceived from the outside. Like, it's one of those things where today I don't own any Rolexes. I don't have a desire to own any. But it's a company I have a lot of respect for. And so it's very interesting when people are like, oh, they're thinking this or they're doing that. And you're like, oh, no. Behind closed doors, they're actually quite humble. They just don't really interact with the watch world. I think there's kind of like the watch industry and then Rolex, like they're kind of separate to it. And that was great. I loved working for Rolex, doing my dream job. And I knew when I'd applied for the job that I'd had relatives who were watchmakers. My mum had told me that. But it was only while I was there, when I had a pensions meeting and was told I had 39 years working at the same workbench until I retired, that I basically went back to my workbench and was like, oh, I think I want to do something different with my life. I'm not sure if I want to do this every single day. And a few weekends later, I'm back home talking to my parents about that, saying, oh, maybe I want to do my own thing. At this stage, not even thinking it would be in the watch world, just, maybe run my own company. And my mum, as she was serving up the roast lunch, sort of serving up the roast potatoes, jokingly goes, well, why don't you restart the family watch company? And I'm like, well, what family watch company? She's like, oh, those relatives, the watchmakers. Yes, they ran a company. And I'm like, okay. So she goes away and she comes back. Actually, it's blown up here next to me on the wall. But this advert from 1946 celebrating the 100th anniversary of Fears starting here in Bristol. And suddenly I'm reading about this company that employed 100 watchmakers here in Bristol, exporting to 95 countries around the world. It was a major watch company. It was the largest watch company in the west of England. And I'm going, okay, well, firstly, thanks for never bringing that up and mentioning that to me. But secondly, light bulb moment, I think I know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And that basically started me on a journey. And we're now nearly 7 years since I left Rolex. So there we go. I got it into about 13 minutes. So hopefully.
Was that the short version, was it? I thought...
that was the short version.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
It's a great story, Nicholas. It's a great story.
Yes. And it's funny that you didn't know about it, and then over your roast potatoes, it suddenly just came up.
You discover.
Well, the thing is, if you're told you have a great grandfather who was a watchmaker, I mean, straight off saying your great grandfather sets the scene of this dusty workshop at the top of an old rickety staircase, and there is this old man hunched over his bench with his loupe, and you have this vision, right, of what a watchmaker was like in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
Rather than thinking he was walking into one of the multiple premises that Fears used to own. And, you know, there were boardrooms and there were departments and there was all of this, you know, and yeah, it was that very weird thing where I jumped to the conclusion and never pushed and never asked more. But actually, yeah, it's that thing when you make an assumption, actually always push. I always ask the question.
Wow. Okay. So going back to the original company, well, my questions are always two-parted. So in terms of the Garrick, the Brunswick, all the modern iterations of Fears watches, you say they should take you from the beach to the board. Was it? Well, I think it was maybe more a specific watch where that strapline came from. But yeah, generally, I think you mean for Fears as well, that from the beach to the boardroom, you want that universal wearability. And like with the Garrick as well, it's kind of, I think that's probably more boardroom. How does that tie into the DNA of the original Fears that your family were would they be turning in their graves with that kind of strap line, or was that, are you keep staying quite true to it and just, you know, just making it versatile?
It's interesting you say that about the Garrick, because one of the things that no one seems to ever pick up on, the Garrick is 100-meter water resistant. It's actually, you could swim in it if you wanted. Like it's, and it was our first 100-meter water resistant watch that Fears had ever created. So yeah, that's a little tidbit for exactly. I'm sure one of the first owners is going to send me a photo now of them wearing it on a beach. So I think this is the thing, you know, when I was restarting Fears, you go, right, you know, the company had been dormant for 39 years. This is something I always make a big point about. You know, I'm not going to gloss over the fact it closed down. It disappeared. You know, literally the archive was burnt. You know, it went. So when I was restarting it, I was restarting from scratch. Yes, I had a few pieces like, you know, old adverts, but the family didn't own any old Fears watches. Like our archive was, you know, a handful of photographs and that's it. And so really when it came to working out like how I was going to bring it back, the easiest obvious thing would have been stick 1846 on the dial, the founding year, and just make a retro vintage watch. That would have been the easiest way. And the company would have been much more successful, much quicker. But in fact, I thought actually I'd rather do something a little different, which is let's look at what Fears used to make. So let's buy watches off eBay, you know, acquire information, you know, expand, get old catalogs and just analyze the watches and go, not for a specific model, but for a specific feel. Like what was the Fears catalog in 1976 when the company closed? What was it in 1946 when it celebrated 100th anniversary? What was it when it produced its first wristwatches in the early 1920s? You know, let's look at what Fears made. And very quickly we realize basically they made just solid everyday watches. What they didn't make were like tool watches. They just made everyday watches. They made some which were dressier, some which had practical things like central red seconds hands for timing things, the odd chronograph. There was the odd diver, but it was much more on the sort of skin diver sort of end of the spectrum. Yeah. And I thought, actually, what if I tried to imagine, what if Fears didn't close in 1976? What if in 2016 it was still operating? Now, I mean, that's a fanciful tale because, of course, a relatively small British watch company, it would have been subsumed into a group. It would have become a trademark. It would have just disappeared. But, let's run with my fantasy. If Fears had kept going, what would it make today? And basically it was saying, a solid everyday watch. Yes, something on the slightly more elegant, dressier side, but something that you can wear, during the day, but then dress it up and wear it at the evening. You can wear it to the beach. I mean, I wore the prototype for this on a beach in Montenegro for 10 days during the summer. And it was wonderful because during the day you're sweating into it and it's fine. I sadly can't swim, so I wasn't going in the sea, and it's also why we don't make a dive watch today, because, one day I'll learn to swim first. But then in the evening, I'd go up to the hotel room and I'd literally run it under the cold tap, dry it off, and then put it on with a linen shirt and go out for dinner. And, it's that sort of thing. It's saying basically Fears is not the Defender. It's the Range Rover. It's the thing that you can drive across a field. It's very capable. It does what it says on the tin, but you can hose it off and drive it to the opera the same evening. And I think that's the thing. People often think of Fears as just being very dressy, but I would say it's more classical, but it's over-engineered. I mean, even watches like Ryan with your Brunswick White Mark II, we rate it to 50-meter water resistant. We're pressure testing those higher than that. We've done the same with the Brunswick 40s. Right. It's that thing of a bit like a 1980s Mercedes-Benz, right? It doesn't look like a tank, but it's built like one. And for me, it's going actually, beach to boardroom. We came up with that slogan specifically for the Brunswick 40, but actually it applies to the whole Fears range. Things like the Garrick, is our sort of most complicated, hand finished, and yet it's still a watch that, 100-meter water resistant, shock absorbing, it's something you can wear and enjoy.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. Absolutely. And obviously the Platinum Brunswick as well is 100 meters. That's good enough for the beach as well, is it?
Good enough for the beach. Good enough for the beach.
Right, thank you. Andy?
Brilliant. Yeah, so I think it leads pretty well to my wristwatch check. So I'm a big fan of Art Deco design and more rectangular watches I find myself gravitating to lately. And I saw within your catalogue you have, correct me if I'm saying this not correct, but the archival, the 1930.
The archival. Yeah, the archival.
Archival, sorry, archival. Yeah, told you. That's it. Yeah, the archival. Sorry, yeah. I really love that. Like, I was hovering over to go onto the wait list for it. But do you have plans to maybe bring back any other designs or Art Deco designs from the past? So that's one question, other than the one what you already have, of course. But the other question to it is, do you see maybe a bit of a trend going back to Art Deco design, or do you think it belongs in the past?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. Okay, well, the first one is, the first question is sort of quite easy to answer in saying, with our archival family of watches, at the moment, we've got the one piece, the archival 1930, which uses a new old stock movement, and it's based on a watch we made in 1930. We have an archive filled with incredible pieces, unusual case shapes. Have a look at it. If you look on our Instagram, there's a piece we made in 1928 and it's octagonal. It's just got the most incredible octagonal faceted case. Pieces like that, you think, actually, these would be amazing to bring back. It's sort of like a limited run. It's not core collection, But, you know, the archival 1930, it has such a loyal following. You know, the people who own one absolutely love it. You know, it really is. But there are a lot of people who go, it's not for me, it's rectangular. I mean, to be frank, rectangular watches are more complicated to machine and make. Bizarrely, you would have thought straight sides easier, but no, it's actually more difficult. Yeah. Secondly, you know, if we think cushion cases are niche, rectangles are even nicher, to be honest. Okay. So there's a very strong commercial reason not to do unusual case shapes. But for me, I just think they're fun. I think they're enjoyable. But then that leads into your second question, which it's a great question. No one's ever asked me about whether 1930s, that Art Deco period, comes back. Because, you know, we saw at first it was all about the 50s and 60s. Then the 70s started coming in. And that's, you know, that's why 4 or 5 years ago, the Royal Oak in particular and the Nautilus gained attraction. Everyone assumed it was just because they were a sports watch. Actually, it was because a lot of people were starting to appreciate the 70s, and those two are like poster child 70s, right? Along with the Countach. So 30s, I'll be honest, I would love the 30s as a design, just to come roaring back.
Yep.
But I don't think it will, sadly. I don't think it will. I think there's a reason why. So if you look at mid-century design right through the 70s and everything, things may look over-designed, but actually they stem from that sort of mid-century modernist, very elegant, very simple design. Whereas if you look at sort of Art Deco, you can see how it came out of Art Nouveau, and it's much more, even though in the 30s, well, 1925 is when Art Deco was actually officially invented as a name. But when you look at that in the 20s, everyone was like, oh my goodness, it's so bare, it's so austere. But actually, if you look at it and then compare it to the 50s and the 60s, Art Deco is full of embellishment. And, you know, the numerals, the shapes, even those, you know, look at something like a Reverso with its bands across the top, you know, it's very designed. And I think people nowadays actually, they like design details, but they like their watches to have less sort of overt design to it. That's certainly not a criticism. I think it's just, if you look at a lot of the core watches from the 20s and 30s, from the Art Deco period, they're very distinctive. And I think you have to be a real lover of them. And I think that's why we haven't yet seen a huge revival, and we haven't seen lots of people gravitating towards them. It's also why we haven't seen that many brought back. You know, we haven't seen, okay, fine, you've got, you know, things from Cartier, things from JLC, but we haven't seen that many other Art Deco favorites coming out. And I think it's also, it's a period where there weren't that many production watches. So we take for granted that you open a catalog and you see a watch and you go, oh, I can buy that. And in a year's time, you can buy it again. But actually, if you go to the 30s, a lot of watches from brands were still made in small production. I mean, okay, pretty high end, but take Audemars Piguet. Until pretty much the late 60s, they never made more than about, well, actually, for Audemars Piguet, until about the 50s, 60s, almost every watch was unique. Vacheron only made watches in batches of 12. So if you look at the 1930s, they didn't have like a huge production range of one watch. They were like, every watch was slightly different. So it's it would be a tricky period to try and recreate. You'd have to pick a particular watch like we did and then run with it. Yeah. You know, but having said all that, yeah, I mean, I love the Art Deco period. It's just so elegant. It's so, I've just, last week I was on a cruise with my mum, and we were on a Cunard liner, and everything on the ship is all Art Deco, you know, it's with the glass and it's just, it's so achingly glamorous. It's beautiful. And you know, the watch you're wearing, it's interesting because I know a watch dealer in London who a few years ago basically bought as a job lot loads of new old stock cases of that design, and none of them were labeled. None of them had a name other than the case maker. And it was just fascinating because he was kind of giving them as a job lot, as a, I don't know what to do with these, no one's interested in them. And you're looking at them going, they're just so special. Just so special. I wish there were more of that jumping hour rectangular watch.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Well, if you ever do one, I'll be on it. Yeah, 100%. But it's a shame.
Made a sale
It's a
there
shame.
if you made
Yeah,
one.
you've got a sale. At least one. You've sold one. But yeah, I'd love to see him make a comeback. But maybe very long in the past and to be appreciated by certain collectors, maybe. But yeah, fingers crossed it's revived one day, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you. Yeah, great answer.
Excellent. So, Ryan.
All right. So, Nicholas, I'm going to kind of go off a little bit the fears questions. I'm going to ask you about your former employer, Rolex.
Yes.
And what do you think of the new certified pre-owned offering that they're doing?
Oh, I thought by avoiding joining any other lives, I would have avoided having to answer this. Okay. So I think there's a few interesting things here. I think it's certainly true to focus on the fact that Rolex take a very long time before they do something, right? And when they do something at first, it's kind of like, what? Why are they doing that? And then it suddenly becomes apparent, basically it becomes apparent, a few years down the line. I'll be honest, when I worked at Rolex, even when I left Rolex, you could still walk into a shop anywhere in the UK and buy a Submariner, and they didn't have it in stock. They could get it for you next day, So I'm still in my mindset of the slightly old, the old ways. I mean, people will be shaking their heads there. So when you work at Rolex, there is staff discount, which is pretty generous. Now, when I was there, I remember picking out watches. I bought my mother a ladies' Datejust. When I bought that, I could have easily at the same time got, a Daytona, a Hulk, a Pepsi, anything you want. If you can afford it, you can buy it. And there are days where I'm kind of like, damn it, why didn't I do that? Why do I not have a safe filled with Daytonas? But
Yeah.
it's hindsight is wonderful, isn't it? But no, so okay, let's go back to your question, Ryan. So the certified pre-owned. I think when Moser first were doing it, and I think Urwerk or someone else were doing it, this is several years ago. I remember at the time thinking, okay, the first people have put their neck out there and started this. This is going to be big eventually. But just as with something like Baselworld was dying, but it only died when Rolex made a move, right? So certified pre-owned, there will be so many big brands who have been basically debating this for ages. Do we do it? Don't we do it? How do we do it? Rolex has basically set the standard for everyone, and everyone now has to either follow that or has to give a really good reason why not to. And I think, I say don't quote me on this, but this is recorded, so, people will do. I think if you look in, 18 months, 24 months from now, I think they're really, you will walk into most jewelers and you'll have the new watches and the old watches, because basically they've shown a way for everyone to make money on it, right? Rolex makes money by servicing it. The retailer, their authorized retailer, has another way of making money, so they're going to be happy with that. It also, the biggest and most important thing is, we were joking about this in the wristwatch check, right? It's very rare for people just to keep buying more and more watches, right? Certainly when you're looking at the Rolex level, most people are selling some things to buy something. What you've suddenly got with the certified pre-owned is you've got this nice way of basically being able to do trade-ins, being able to do that upgrade. Whereas before you would often have to then go to a watch dealer or to, you do it through forums, whereas now you can kind of, you can walk into Bookerer and start trading, because they now have a way of making money on it without offending the main brand. So in terms of what I think of it, I mean, yeah, we can argue about the pricing and the difference, But I tell you what, if you're, if you're Joe Blogs, so you're not going to be watching this video, right? You're not in that sort of 5% of people who really care about watches, and you walk into a store which you trust. Fine, there's a watch there and it says, it's a pre-owned watch and it comes with box and papers. Great. Don't know what that means, but it comes in a box. That's nice. Okay, great. Oh, here's one. It's certified pre-owned. Rolex are basically giving it that tick of it's genuine. It's not stolen. It's not fake. Oh my goodness, is that powerful, right? That is that is worth thousands of pounds to know that your money is going somewhere safe. Because when you're talking about that level of money, people will go, actually, I would rather pay a few £1,000s more for peace of mind. The fact is, because we're talking about prices that are above the retail price, that's why we kind of think that's strange. But it's the same sort of thing, right? If you're buying a used car, right? If you certified pre-owned, it comes with the warranty from the manufacturer. It's been checked, it's been cleaned. It's as close to buying the new thing as you can get. So it's worth paying a premium, right? I've never owned a car less than 15 years old, so I'm a bad example. But I think that's the thing. Certified pre-owned isn't for us, but it is going to have a massive impact on the industry, and I think it's a good thing, because what happens after that first person has bought a watch has kind of always been a bit of an awkward area for watch brands to talk about. Servicing. Oh, let's not talk about the watch stopping. When you need to sell it, let's not talk about that. Trading it in, the fact you might get less. These are all topics that watch brands like Rolex have tried to avoid, discussing, until they realize that actually they can make it work and they can dress it up to be something good. And I think it is good. I think, if it means that there are less super clone watches around there, if it means that less people are getting screwed over by buying something and it not turning up, or something bad happening when it does turn up, that's good, because it gets more people into this hobby, into this interest, right? And that's only ever going to be a good thing, in my opinion.
No, that's true. I think sometimes we all get lost in our little bubble of world of watch life, and sometimes forget about exactly what you're saying. So thanks for answering it.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Okay. I'd like to ask you, Nicholas, who you feel your nearest competitor is in the watch world.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, obviously, Philippe Dufour, Roger Smith, goes without saying, right? I think it's actually very interesting, because when people ask me this, like, who is your competitor? You either go down the big brands, what is someone not buying from the established brands to buy from Fears, or you're looking at the British brands who are the competitors there. I would, so rather than saying who I think are our direct competitors, because to be honest, our direct competitors are another watch, right? Or a holiday, or a mortgage, a deposit for a mortgage on a house, right? But who do I see, or who do I admire? Who are people who I'm always get that flush of pride when people mention Fears in the same breath?
Yeah,
I would say sort of number one will be the likes of Cartier. Andy and everyone who is watching this will clearly know that I'm a big fan of the 1930s and shaped watches, and just look at what's in the Fears collection, right? We have one round watch, that's it. So I love what Cartier do. I love the fact that they were founded the year after Fears, and so as this young upstart brand, they've done really well for themselves. You've got to hand it to them. But joking aside, I think what they do is really, really good. It's really sensible. They're going, well, the new CEO, when he joined a few years ago, Cartier weren't doing that well. No one really cared about them. And what he did was he actually got rid of a lot of the product lines, a lot of the families. And he said, you know what we do? We do shaped watches, and we do that better than anyone else. We basically own that. So let's focus on doing that. And he focused on doing this thing, which seems incredibly niche. And Cartier's what? The second largest Swiss watchmaker now, behind Rolex. You know what? Actually, niche is kind of cool. And I don't admire them because I want to become Cartier. No, I certainly don't. And I wouldn't want to run a business of that size. But I admire them for knowing what they're good at doing and not going, oh, we need to do a Cartier dive watch. They used to do it. Guess what? It didn't sell. Whereas you bring out something like the Pebble, which I personally think is rather overpriced. But that aside, you bring out something like the Pebble. I went to I met with you guys, didn't I, at the Watch Pro salon in London. Yeah. How many people did you see trying on and photographing at the Bonham stand with their 1970s Pebble? Like that watch basically stole the show. Yeah, and yet we're talking about the most weird, niche, unusual watch. But then, I was flicking through a magazine the other day, and my husband, he's a professor in mathematics, he has nothing to do with watches, but he does wear a Cartier, which I bought him on our honeymoon. He looked over my shoulder and he saw the Pebble and he goes, "Oh, stop, go back. What's that? That's beautiful. Who makes that?" And you suddenly go, wow, for someone who isn't into watches, even he's going, wow, look at that. That's cool. That's unusual. That's different. So I would say that, that's probably, I hope people don't think this is a cop-out answer, but, I would say they're the people I admire the most. And if anyone was saying, ooh, I would think about buying something from you or something from Cartier, I would be over the moon, and I will always want them to buy Fears. Of course I do. But, I would, if they buy the Cartier, I will take my hat off and say, you still bought an absolutely stunning watch. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Excellent. Andy?
Oh, so yeah, I've maybe got a 3-pointer for you, Nicholas. So this be an interesting one. So the first part would be, do you believe that British watchmaking, in general, that the industry are finally getting the recognition they deserve? And the next part to that question would be, how does it feel being a part of that and sharing the stage, with people like Roger Smith and legacies such as George Daniels, etc.? And last part would be, what are the biggest challenges the British watch industry face in being maybe more globally accepted or known?
Okay, good. Yeah, good questions. God, I'm trying to remember what the first part was. Okay, so
yeah, sorry.
Okay, so actually, So the British watch industry is a funny thing. It's a very interesting thing. And some of the things I'm going to say are going to make me sound not particularly patriotic. And that's not the case. That's not the case. I want to see the British watch industry succeed. I always say, I don't mind if you've bought a Fears or another British watch. I'm just pleased you've bought a British watch, and I'm one of the founding members of the Alliance of British Watch and Clockmakers, and it's a very interesting organization because it's our trade body, right? So until a few years ago, we didn't have a trade association representing the watch industry and the clock industry. And some people have criticized it, saying, well, you've got such a ridiculous broad range of brands in there, everything from Roger Smith down to some brands where, for want of a better phrase, it's a Chinese catalog watch. I say I don't care. I don't care in the slightest, because you know what? If someone is created a watch company, they're making a watch, whether they've designed it or whether they've bought it, if they're doing that, they're paying taxes in the UK, they're employing people in the UK, that in my mind is good. Because when I talk to people outside of the watch industry, other business owners, and they'll talk about things like recruitment, and I'll be there going, I think as of today, Fears is the 7th largest British watch company in terms of team size, how many people we employ. And we're tiny, like absolutely tiny. We have certain roles like marketing, which is kind of spread out amongst the team. So if you're saying, oh, I'm a marketing specialist and I want to work in the British watch industry, you kind of have got like barely 5 companies you can work for.
Wow.
So actually what I want to see is these companies grow so that actually, everyone thinks of the British watch industry just in terms of watchmaking, which of course is important. But actually for an industry to thrive, it's about how it grows outside of just that one role. Watchmaking is one part of what makes a watch company. So I want to see that basically continue to develop. Now, in terms of where, how I feel being part of this, I feel incredibly proud. I'm going to name drop a bit here, but, on Thursday, I'm spending most of the day with Mike France, the founder of Christopher Ward. And, I feel very proud to say, Mike is a close personal friend of mine. We met a few years ago at a watch event, and we hit it off. And then next week I'll be up in Scotland, and I'm having lunch with Roger Smith, who's there. Wow. And again, Roger and I, we'll WhatsApp. Something will happen, a new watch will come out, and we'll WhatsApp each other, just asking what do you think of it, or And I'm very lucky to have people like that in my sort of circle of WhatsApp buddies. But it's also for me more than all that. It's I've admired these guys for decades. I remember when Christopher Ward first came out, I was just starting university, and I remember just thinking, what? They're only selling online? They're crazy. This will never work, And yet, Christopher Ward basically paved the way for every watch company that started in the last decade. If it wasn't accepted to sell direct to consumer and sell online, I couldn't have restarted Fears. Now, today we have 9 retail partners around the world. So, we've moved and grown from just being direct to the end owner. But I think it's important to look at those people and go, actually, in their different way, Mike and Roger are very different people. They have very different skill sets, but both of them have had a huge impact on the watch industry. And so to look at the Alliance website and see, my small little watch company in amongst their names and in amongst some of the most innovative guys out there makes me incredibly proud. I mean, earlier today, I had a quick phone call out of the blue from Richard Benck, the founder of Studio Underdog.
Studio Underdog, yeah.
And he is such a fab guy, absolute great guy. I mean, when I was over in New York for the Wind Up Watch Fair in October, it became a running joke that he and I were basically going down to the pub every single night after the show finished. And we basically, the Brits abroad, we got all the British brands together, and we just decamped to the pub and stayed there until the early hours. But, being in the same group as these people is fantastic. Now, to go on to your third part of your question. So in terms of what
I think there's another one coming.
Okay, so in terms of where James the advisor, can I get those WhatsApp numbers? Yeah. Very cheeky, I love it. So in terms of where we're going and what we're doing and how we can grow and how we can play, I think it's very, very important that we do something as a British industry. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that at no point are we entitled to even have a British watch industry. We have got some incredible historical feats, automatic winding, escapements, all these things. I mean, fantastic. But can we park that for a moment and say the only reason the British watch industry has a right to exist today is if we're actually doing something better than other people. You shouldn't buy a watch just because it's British. You should buy it because of something that comes as a result of it being British. Now, I do see, when you look at the broad range of British watch companies, I see something that we all do. We have a very distinctive design philosophy. Now, people will laugh at me and go, sorry, what are you talking about? You've got Garrick here, you've got Anordain here, you've got Vertex here, Braymore, Christopher Ward, Elliot Brown. Okay. But actually, no, we do something that they don't do in Switzerland, and they don't do in Germany, and they don't do in France. And it is, we have all unwittingly subscribed to the same British design sensibility, which Terence Conran many years ago put down in writing. He said, what I believe is the root of all British design is graceful yet purposeful function. And it's the fact that we don't go down the entirely German Teutonic, form follows function, but neither are we going down a purely creative here. What we do is we create watches that actually a lot of people will agree with me, I hope, have soul. And the reason they have soul is because they have tiny little design details that are charming, that are whimsical. You'll see a straight hand and then it'll have a little bevel or a little curve. And these are the little details that make what I believe Swiss watches warmer and have more character on the wrist than most Swiss watches. I think one of the only watch brands that actually begins to come close and then goes off straight away because it's so incredibly French is FP Journe. Compare an FP Journe to a Laurent Ferrier. Swiss, French, compare the two, and you see very distinctively how one is so ridiculously French, but one is also incredibly Swiss. And I think this is the thing. It's, look at it in cars. Even today, however much they've tried to bash it out of themselves, French cars are still wonderfully weird. And I think that's what makes them so strong. That's why France has such a strong car industry, is because a Citroën, a Renault, Peugeot, they're still very French. And I think what we need to do as a British industry, British watch industry, is make sure we don't lose sight of that. Let's go, great. We've got a good basis. We've got the historical significance. Look, Fears has this heritage. That's wonderful. But fundamentally, if you look at the watch today and I remove the name from the dial and the word England at 6 o'clock, I want you to still want to own the watch. And if you don't, then we're doing something drastically wrong.
Great answer. So I'm going to ask a really fast question. And
I'll give you a fast answer. There you go.
Yeah,
we'll do a deal here.
So something I've heard is, a trait of British watchmaking is, the typical bridges within the watch, in the movement are generally thicker compared to, Swiss. Is that a trait what you have in Fears watches as well?
So historically, yes. I mean, today except for the Garrick, we use Swiss movements today. But it's something actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the big things about the Garrick movement, is it's designed using a lot of it's not based on an old English movement, but it's using a lot of the design language from old English movements, the thick bridges, the way the cocks are screwed in, the way it's all built, but also in terms of the finishing. Historically, British movements, we didn't have any Côte de Genève. Even though when we used to get our movements finished up in Norwich in a workshop there, I used to always joke that it was Côte de Norwich. But no, if you look at what the English movements, they were always finished with a frosted finish. That's the traditional finish, which people often dismiss and go, but Côte de Genève looks perlage, these look fancier. Actually, a frosted finish is really difficult to get right. Like, it's really difficult because it's always mistaken for just being a matte, like unfinished machine finish. It's not. It's a very particular finish. And for reasons like that, I mean, I saw there was actually a question from someone earlier, and if I may, I'll just quickly answer it because it links in with this. It was walks and watches. Thank you for your patience. It was about 20 minutes ago I saw this come up. What other brands do you have?
It was flagged, yeah.
Right. Okay, brilliant. Because I saw that and I thought, actually, this is a very interesting thing when you look at, as a watch brand owner, I'm quite unusual. I don't always wear a Fears watch every day. And quite often people say, but surely you should always be wearing a Fears. And I go, well, look, I'm a watch guy. Like, I like watches. Now, I have a small collection. But one of the watches I absolutely love in that is my Garrick. And it's not a Fears Garrick. It's actually a Garrick. It's a piece unique, a one-off piece made for me by David Brailsford. And what I love about that is the movement. It's a unitas movement. So it's a Swiss movement, pocket watch movement, sub-seconds, gorgeous thing. But the way they finished it in their workshop, it just feels so British, and I love it. It's how they've, just by making a few changes here and there, they've completely changed the look of it. So that's a big favorite of mine. And my most recent acquisition, which I absolutely adore, and I've worn it almost every day since I bought it, is I'm very lucky to own one of the first Christopher Ward Bel Cantos. And that was, I think you guys saw me wearing it at the
we did at
Watch
the
Pro
show.
salon.
Yeah.
Everyone kept coming up to me going, "Oh, can I try on a Brunswick?" And I was like, "You can, but I don't have it on me. I'm actually wearing my Christopher Ward." But you know, I think for me, it's always about watches that are special, watches that have something that make you smile, and also watches that are a good representation of the brands. You know, and I know that Bel Canto isn't the typical of what Christopher Ward do, but I love seeing it when a brand goes, right, roll up the sleeves, you know, hold my beer, we're going for it. And I know a couple of the guys who were in the sort of Skunks Work team who made that watch, and I'm massive admirers of their work. You know, I have a lot of industry respect for them. And so, you know, to see that come out, that was huge. And I even paid 100% retail for that. I never paid discounted prices for my watches. I mean, Fears doesn't, we've never done a discount. We don't do sales. Even my poor mother had to pay full price for her Fears watch. But I think it sets a thing. And I will never ask, if I buy a watch from a brand where I'm friends with the owner, I'll just go on the website and buy it. I'll never ask them for discount, because I think actually, you know, they're running small businesses, and it's very easy to go, oh, Christopher Ward, it's this huge business. They employ 30, 40 people. But actually, no, it started off with 3 people. You know, it literally started off with 3 people, you know, and everyone who works there works so hard. It'd be an insult for me to start buying it for a discount. There you go. I failed. That wasn't a particularly short answer. I will get shorter answers. Okay. Fire quick questions. I'll give them.
Ryan, go, Ryan, go.
Yeah. So, Nicholas, what was that moment that was that aha moment that you knew that you have made it here at Fears and this is going to be a success?
Oh, heck. I think that moment is still rather elusive. I think it will come one day. I'll be honest. It was the closest I've got to that moment, because I never stop and look at what's happened. I think, like most people who set up and run a small business, I'd like to say focused. I think it's more kind of panicked, staring into the abyss of how many jobs you've got to do tomorrow and next month and next year, that you rarely stop and acknowledge what you've achieved, what you've done. I would say, though, the closest I got to it was the other evening, a few weeks ago. I was working late in the office. I was here on my own, and I'd come downstairs, and it was like 10 o'clock, and I'd made another cup of tea. And as I was heading up the stairs, literally behind me, I caught my shoe on one of the steps, and I sort of tripped a bit, because I was replying to an Instagram message on my phone. I wasn't concentrating on what I was doing. And so I didn't fall over, but it meant that, of course, the tea like slurped out of the cup, and I was like, oh, I've got to go and get a cloth and like mop it up. Anyway, as I was doing that, mopping it up, I suddenly just stopped and looked around here and was like, oh my goodness, when did we suddenly have this like multi-story premises in Bristol? And I looked at the desks and was like, when did we suddenly have desks which are all full and they have people? And at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, the team will be here working all together. And I just suddenly was, you know what, it sounds really stupid, but it's one of those things where you need to be like shaken out of your daydream of modern life. And anyone who follows me on Instagram will see that I'm like, you know, in the next 10 days, I'm going to be in 5 cities doing 2 flights. You know, my life is always on the road. I spend a couple of nights a week actually in Yorkshire, where I live with my husband. Most of the time I'm in hotels or in my house share here in Bristol. So I rarely stop. And when you suddenly stop and get shaken out of that, I don't know, it's kind of like almost emotional thinking about it. You suddenly go, oh, wow, this has actually all happened. You know, because I had dreamt about this for so many years. You know, the number of long nights, I mean, when I first reincorporated Fears, I was still at Rolex, and it would be another 2.5 years before I left Rolex. I spent 2.5 years, saving money, selling watches, trying to basically, if it wasn't screwed down in my house, it went on eBay. I did whatever was necessary to like build up my startup fund. But one thing I did, because I didn't tell anyone I was doing this, because I was so scared that Rolex would find out and fire me. I kept in my breast pocket of my jacket a photocopy of the incorporation certificate. And whenever I had a dark moment where I thought this is never going to get off the ground, this is never going to happen, I would always look at that and go, you know what, even if it doesn't, I've done it. I've at least reincorporated the company. And then you get to launch day and you go, I'm wearing watch number 1, which was a Redcliffe piece from our first batch. And I go, even if it all fails tomorrow, at least I've got Fears back on a watch dial in the 21st century. And then, there's all these moments where you think, well, if it all goes to shit tomorrow, at least I've done this. So I don't think I ever stop, and I certainly wouldn't stop and congratulate myself on what I've done, because it's not me. It's the people who will be here at 9 o'clock tomorrow. I mean, it's very cheesy to be like, thank you for my Oscar. Let me now thank everyone else for this Oscar. But no, it is true. They are all better at the jobs they do than I am. I've only got one aim, is, running a company. I think you should strive to be the dumbest guy in the room. And guy can be guy or girl, and I think that's the number one aim. Everyone around you should be better at what they do. And most of the people who work at Fears aren't from the watch industry, because the watch industry isn't big enough for people to have, career moves. I mean, put it this way. In the Swiss watch industry, we talk about, Rolex and companies, Omega and, George Kern at Breitling and the CEOs. Just stop and think about this for a moment. And please, someone in the comments correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe all of the CEOs of British watch companies are the founders. There are no career British watch CEOs. That job does not exist. And I think for a moment, when you stop and think about it, it puts where British watchmaking is today compared to Switzerland or even Germany. And I think that's, I think that's an important thing. And I think that's why, we joke about the WhatsApp numbers and, I think it's because, Roger Smith, he created R.W. Smith himself. Mike France created Christopher Ward. David Brailsford created Garrick. Richard, these are all people who are going through the exact same journey I am, but at different stages. I remember during the pandemic, when Fears almost went bankrupt, we'd had several months of no sales, and I took a pay cut to keep my team employed. And I was working night shifts at Asda, picking online orders. So if anyone was in the Canterbury area during the pandemic, I'm sorry for the substitutions I gave you. But while I was doing that, I remember, I think someone I told, I think it was Mike France, he had told Roger Smith. And I remember getting a text from Roger saying, good on you, night shifts are hard. I remember doing those many years ago, working in a shop doing night shifts, and they don't get easier. It's really soul destroying, but like, keep going, it's worthwhile doing. And you're suddenly going, you know what? That's the thing in Britain. We're all at different stages of the same journey. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think that bonds us together. I think this is, without getting too sort of, romantic about it, I think this is why, and this goes back to a question I think Andy asked, the third one or the second one of his three-parter. This is what makes me so proud to be part of the British watch industry today. When I was in New York and we had, I think it was 9-10 British watch brand owners in a pub all together. We actually did a selfie all together. And you're just thinking, this is a golden moment in time. This will never happen again, because in not that many years from now, people will be retiring and they'll be, the first professional CEOs, and they will be good at their job. But this is a golden moment. This will be the moment you look back and you go, wow, this is what it was like when, in the era when Rolex was founded and, when all the Swiss brands were starting in the, in the 19th century. That moment is taking place right now. And yeah, I couldn't be happier to be part of it in my small little way. It's great.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Did that answer your question, Ryan? I hope it did.
I think it did. I think so.
Sorry, I'm very good at going
it's
off.
good.
On...
I love it. Oh, hey,
Uh,
I can be the same way too.
I'm going to ask the last
That's great.
question from the panel, and then we'll move on to some from the chat. So, one thing I've noticed about yourself, Nicholas, is obviously immaculately dressed, very dapper, even from the Watch Pro Salon show as well. You stood out miles beyond everyone else. Always well turned out, well attired. So, I mean, it's nice to bump to another fellow Poirot fan as well, who's a fan of that age as well, such as myself. And but who is your style inspiration, and what watch would they wear? Which Fears watch would they wear? And if it wasn't and what non-Fears watch would your style inspiration wear?
Ooh, okay, interesting. So I have two style inspirations. Both are renowned for being very stylish gentlemen, but they're interestingly, I'll explain very quickly why they're very different. So one of them is Ralph Lauren. And when I was at university, I worked in a Ralph Lauren shop, and that was an incredible dream job. It was so much fun working there. We used to always joke it was working in the pony stable, and I learned lots of interesting things working there. Actually, there's freestyle inspiration. So one of them is Ralph Lauren. But the thing is with Ralph Lauren, he wasn't from that sort of moneyed set. He's a fascinating character, grew up in the Bronx and changed his name to Lauren and, created this beautiful world. And that's very inspiring, creating a beautiful world. Something can be more than the sum of its parts. And that's great. The watch he would wear from the Fears catalog would be the archival. Absolutely. In a tuxedo, dinner suit. And in fact, when it comes to what other watch he would wear, he'd probably wear a tiny little tank. One of those, you see it with Muhammad Ali, where he's wearing like a tiny little postage stamp gold tank. So stylish. So, a watch that's like, it just disappears, And here's a quote that he isn't credited with, but I remember when I was researching the watches he wore, I read about, and it talks about why a gentleman's dress watch usually only has two hands. And it's because a gentleman never needs to know the seconds. And I rather like that. Okay, so the second one will be an Italian gentleman, the former CEO of Fiat Group, Gianni Agnelli. And anyone who knows about Agnelli will know he was very famous for doing one thing. So he was famous in the 50s, 60s, 70s. He was the playboy, billionaire, born into money, tons of money. He famously always wore his watch over his cuff. He was the first one to do that. The first one to make a style thing over it. I mean, his watch collection is incredible. And there's loads of rumors. He joked that he did it because he didn't have time to pull his cuff back to read his watch. He was such a busy businessman. He had to do it. I think really it was because Italian shirts, and this is actually an Italian shirt, have very, very tight cuffs. And so often a lot of watches won't slip under them. They have to, so I think it's that. So in terms of the watch that from the Fears range he would wear, I'll be honest, I think he'd wear the Brunswick 40. And I think for that Beach to Boardroom, I mean, he used to, when he was on holiday, so this is how his life was, he'd be finishing work in Turin, board a private jet, get changed on the private jet out of his suits. And he used to wear his very expensive Italian tailored clothing with aplomb. Like he would just throw on a suit costing, 3 months' wage for the average Italian. And he would wear it like someone was wearing a tracksuit. And he was just so achingly stylish. Whereas Ralph Lauren is very precise and very particular. Agnelli just exudes billionaire charm. But I think he would wear the Brunswick 40 because of Beach to Boardroom. As he's on his private jet, he's going from the boardroom. He would then land on the Italian coast. And you know what he would then do at the airport? He would get off his jet into a helicopter. The helicopter would go out to sea, and he would dive out of the helicopter into the sea. And that was the start of the weekend. What a playboy. I mean, just think of that for a moment. And that's the watch. You don't have to worry changing your watch, right? In terms of his collection, Google him. He had the most incredible watch collection. Absolutely incredible. So basically pick anything he had and it's amazing. And then the third one, so this is who I actually learnt how to dress from in terms of how to put colors and textures together. And it's my father, he's a Yorkshire lad from Bradford. And he is just the most stylish man. And it's stylish in a very easy way. You know, he just puts colors together, the way he'll wear jeans and a shirt at the weekend with a jumper over his shoulders. It's just, you know, he wouldn't be offended for me saying this. You know, he's not from a moneyed background. He's from a working class background, but you know, he's done good. And he just has an eye for colors and textures, and the way he does it is inspiring. And I learned everything I know about clothes from him. What Fears watch does he own? So he does own an archival, but he also owns, we made a watch in 2018 called the Fears Redcliffe B. We only made 5 of them, and it had a bright yellow dial. Google it. It was an incredible piece. And he bought one of those. What watch would he wear if he's not wearing that? I hope he would wear a Rolex. I bought him for his 60th. But I think one of the watches he wears most days is a Seconda. Even though he's a corporate lawyer, he works for a big American law firm in the city of London. When it comes to watches, most of his watches are, you know, Seiko 5s, Seconda, Loris. We've heard of Loris, love a Loris titanium Lumi bright dial where the whole dial glows. Yeah, very, very stylish man. Very stylish man. I will get quicker with the answers, I promise.
Brilliant.
Oh, Palm, you're on mute.
Oh, okay. There's about half an
So
hour.
I wondered why it was a
I thought
silence.
there was something wrong with my earpieces. I was just around my earpieces thinking, oh, God, my earpieces are broken.
Oh, no. Right.
Seriously.
Thank you for that, Nicholas. That was amazing. Really enlightening and good insight into a lot of things about the company, yourself, and just the cool guy that you are. I'm going to ask some questions from the chat now. Watches and one, Walks and Watches one has been covered. Chili Badger, I'm not sure what this was in reference to, but if you can remember, just drop it in the chat. Again.
Oh, yeah, no, I remember this. I saw this one come up. This was when I was talking about the archival, and I mentioned it used, I think it was to do with the archival and about it using a new old stock movement. And yeah, so correct. So one of the watches used a 15 jewel movement and one used, I think, a 17 jewel. One of them, we actually found a very small batch of about 40, 50 new old stock movements from 1935. And seeing as we were recreating a watch from 1930, we thought those 5 years people would forgive us. But the important reason was because it was a movement from 1935, it was a rectangular movement and it put the small seconds in the correct location for the dial. It's very difficult to do a rectangular watch with a small seconds if you use a round movement because it's too close to the center. And yeah, that was a great movement. Absolute pain in the arse to work with because you realize in the 30s, movements weren't built to just be interchangeable parts. Every part we had, these movements weren't assembled. We had to finish every part to go. So basically each movement was hand finished and hand assembled to make sure it goes together. And all the raw parts we didn't use, our spare parts, have been left unfinished in oil to protect them. So yeah, that was great. Hopefully that answers your question, Chili Badger.
Right, and here's one from good friend of the show, Thomas Burnett. Nicholas, the Brunswick Pure has an interesting release. Was an interesting release from Fears, I thought. It reminded me of a Moser. Has it been a popular seller for the company?
Yes, it was. So that was very funny. I shared the photo of it with someone literally a few hours before we revealed it. And they said, "Oh, nice Moser." And I was like, oh dear.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. This is awful. And it's that awful moment when you can get very wrapped up in something. And because this watch was being released for a specific occasion and we were only going to sell it for 3 days over a weekend, we were very much, usually I would talk to some trusted people outside the company, because it's good to not be in an echo chamber, right? You know, it's good to get other people. But this was a watch where I was like, you know what, we might not sell any of them, and I don't care, because I want to make it. I think it's important to mark the 5-year occasion. And yeah, so then when the first time I show it to someone outside the company, I suddenly am like, oh, we've been in an echo chamber. At no point did any of us go, oh, someone might compare it to a Moser. And it's like, of course they're going to do this. But yeah, I did send a photo of it to Edouard, who thought it was a very nice watch. And in terms of, has it been a popular seller for the company? So we only sold it for 3 days. And I would say it's probably been one of the most popular watches. We actually sold a disproportionate high number, and people were buying it who I would never have expected to buy it, but they basically just fell head over heels in love with it. And I think a bit like I was saying with you, Andy, earlier about the archival, it's kind of a bit Marmite, right? And I like, I don't want people to say a Fears watch, any of our watches are nice. Please don't say they're nice. Say they're stunning or horrific, but don't say they're nice. And I think the Brunswick Pure is the ultimate one of that. That's it turned to 11, right? You know, it's one of those watches where you go, oh my goodness, what have they done? You know, what has Nicholas been smoking? Or it's the watch where you're going, absolutely get it. This is so Fears, and it's so pure Fears. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Thomas. Thank you for asking it.
Actually, when we were at the show, I actually got to try it on. You kindly let us try it on. And you said you wanted it to be received that everyone recognizes that as a Fears Brunswick. It doesn't, you know, as soon as you see it, you instantly think, okay, apart from Moser, we'll put Moser to the side, but Fears Brunswick. Has the reception of it been, has that been how it has been received, or has it kind of missed on some points?
I've had a couple of people message me saying, ooh, not really sure about it. But I'll be honest, we've had it in one of the display cases in the showroom. And even though it's not available to buy now, it's almost the #1 watch people want to try on. Even if they don't think they're going to like it, they're like, I just got to experience it. And actually, I just saw a comment come up talking about the Brunswick Pure. And if anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, have a look on the Fears website. It's a pretty unusual watch. But the comment question came from Whole Milk saying, we want a Vanta Black Brunswick Pure if you want to go full Moser. Now that would be cool. That would be, yeah, that would be. Did everyone see the Vanta Black version they did for Watches and Wonder, where the watch just disappears? It's just
disappears.
Stuff like that just makes me so happy and so excited. Yeah, I love it. So yeah, that was a great question, Thomas. Thank you for answering it.
Okay, and another one from Thomas is Nicholas. Could you see Fears bringing out a chronograph in the future? Most brands have a chronograph in their catalogue, or do you see the brand as more of a dressier watch brand?
Ooh, okay, another good question. Okay, so Fears historically has some wonderful chronographs, like beautiful ones, but it's very interesting. They're not down the Speedmaster line. They're much more down a bit more like the Breitling Top Time. You know, they're more that sort of like slightly dressier, like a dress chrono, like that slightly dressier, sportier, rather than tool watch. I could see that being in the collection one day. And I can already feel people throwing wet sponges at me when I say this. I'm not really a chrono guy myself. And so slightly selfishly, I tend to focus on the watches I want to make first. But there will come a point where, you know, I'll have to give in and I'll have to become a chrono guy, and we'll probably do it. But it'll be, at the moment, the only Fears chronos are the vintage ones, if you can find one.
Okay, thanks for that. And there's one last question from the Shambasha, and basically he's saying, are there any other British watch names from the past that need to be brought back from the dead? Is there anything you
Okay, so, well, I mean, there are a lot out there. There are a lot of watch companies that came and went. I mean, pretty much if you look at a map of England and put a pin in any town, there will have been at least one watchmaker who will have made watches with that name on the dial. Now, I think what's interesting is there was a company recently, when I say recently, my goodness, it was probably 2 years ago. Okay, so it was basically someone had bought the trademark, the URL and the Instagram and everything, and built up some heritage, like archive material for an old historic brand called Benson. Very high end, beautiful pieces they used to make. And they were selling it as like a package. So whereas people like Don from Vertex and myself have gone and restarted our family's watch companies, and we've done the incorporation, the trademarking, and we've gone through all those, the checklist of things you've got to do. Someone had already done this as a package and was offering it. And what was very interesting is everyone was like, oh my goodness, this is a great opportunity. You get to bring back this amazing name and da-da-da. And I don't think it sold. I don't think anyone bought it. I don't think anyone jumped on that. And I think this is the thing. Heritage is nice. Of course it's nice. Heritage is why I'm sat here in Bristol, not up in Yorkshire, in my home. But it's the icing on the cake. It's not even that. It's the cherry on top. It's also, there can be some negatives to it. So I saw one of the comments come up from a couple of people. I think someone was asking, why is it called Fears? Why is the name Fears? And it's because Edwin Fear, my great-great-great-grandfather, started the business. Now, it's great. It's a 5-letter name. It looks great on the watch dial. It's perfect balance. Hans Willdorf created Rolex for that very reason. 5 letters is the perfect balance on a watch dial. But it's also a slightly unusual name, if we're perfectly honest. Fears, and you say to people, as in the emotion, as in scared of something, as in phobia. You're like, oh my goodness, this is this isn't great. So there can be some negatives. There also can be negatives in terms of legacy. There can be a lot of reasons why people will go, actually, if you are bringing an old name back, you kind of have to reference what they did in the past. And unless you're doing it like Don does with Vertex and I do, where you go, actually, where you go, we've got this past, we could just recreate it, but instead we're going to try and create a modern version, and Fears closed for 39 years. And I'll be honest, it pains me to say this, but actually that was a blessing, because it allowed the company to, be able to come back rather than being, owned by some group as a trademark, which would have been, thrown around and, and not handled properly.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that concludes our questions from the gallery. Johnny, would you like to close?
Certainly will. Thank you so much for taking up your time. It was a brilliant interview. Really, really
Excellent.
Fascinating. We could have made a full day of this.
I think so. Yeah.
Maybe we should. We'll come to.
Maybe we should do something like get you in with some get your watches in front of you and have a look and do a product thing showing your watches off.
Well, you're always welcome down here in Bristol. We'll get the kettle on.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Really good. Right. So everybody, thank you for watching. Thanks for getting involved, and thank you for the wonderful questions. Thank you to Palm, to Andy, and to Ryan for helping set this up. And I'll say good night to everybody. And please upvote the channel. Please vote. Thomas Burnett.
Super chat.
Super chat. Sorry.
You've got rid of it. Yeah.
Thank you for your time and insights, Nicholas. Brilliant. Great show. Enjoyed it. Thank you, Matt H. Excellent. I'll say good night to everybody. So please upvote and please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And we'll say good night to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.